Now we're in our third series, or our third webinar of our 4-part series. And if you're just joining us, my name's Steve Loez. I'm the founder and CEO of Qualigence International. We're a global recruitment and research and talent optimization firm here in Michigan. But one of the things I wanted to be really clear about is, as I go through and share with you my own experiences, the things that I'm sharing real time are actually learnings that I'm going through. So this is not me saying, here's how you ought to do it. Everything that I've shared in the first 2 sessions today and then finally next week are things that are real time with me, that I'm going through, that I thought might be relevant for other leaders to pay attention to. So that's the whole purpose of this 4-part webinar series, Leadership in Times of Crisis, because it's been a crisis for everybody. If you go back to video number 1 or webinar number 1, I really share a lot about how I made poor decisions in the past in the financial crisis of 2008 and 9. And really it was not always about the decision itself, but it was how the decision was made. That was the emphasis behind number 1. The way we make decisions is often a bigger deal than the decision itself, or can make a good decision actually pretty bad. The other thing that we looked at was that our decisions as leaders will actually show our teams who we really are. So if we're talking about teamwork, and I talk a lot about the idea of purpose, but it's not being lived out by the way that we treat our teams or the way that we interact with our teams in times of crisis, then the true you, the true purpose of who you are, is coming out. I was having a conversation yesterday with somebody I've known for a long, long time, and she asked, what do you think the number 1 challenge is going to be after the coronavirus is kind of gone and things get back to normal, and hopefully they do soon. And I said, the organizations, and I'm going to include myself in this, that didn't treat certain people right. We think about employee experience, we think about, engaging our teams, but those that didn't treat their teams right, are they going to get those individuals back when they need them? And I think that's a big concern for every organization. I'll actually touch on some things here too. Look, I have not done everything perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's a lot better than the way I handled it in 2008 and 9, but I'm still learning through this because we've never been through something like this. So that was kind of the one of the big issues that I think is going to come about as the coronavirus kind of subsides and we start getting back to work and we start trying to recruit our teams back or bringing them back. I think that'll be a challenge. So that was number 1, just how we make decisions. In the second webinar last week, we talked about communication in times of crisis. And this is new for me, right? And I shared kind of the 3 things: how I'm communicating now, how often I'm communicating now, and then the amount of detail that I'm communicating, and basically opening ourselves up to be a little bit like a fishbowl where everybody can see in. But I think in our circumstance, that has served us well. So we applied for the Payroll Protection Act as well in order to keep our team employed. And so far we've been able to do that. And we were approved yesterday, which is great. And being able to share all of that, both while we were waiting, the fact that we filed the application, the fact that we got approved for it, what happens next, when do we get funded, all of that is being shared with the team and communicated with the team so that they're aware of what's the next step. They're aware of what could happen, what might not happen, and so forth. So we spent a lot of time around this idea of communication. And I still think I've blundered a gazillion times in the last 4 weeks specifically, but making progress. Today, though, it's a little bit of a switch of gears. And we've all experienced this in some form or fashion. And I've labeled it, everyone's remote, now what? What do we do? So you may be saying, look, I've already had people working remote, or I've been working remote. That's awesome. Maybe you'll get something out of this, maybe you won't. But for those of us that are used to having people in our offices that we can engage with, interact with, high five back then, have a cup of coffee with in our one of our lunchrooms here, right? Go to the gym with here in the building that we put in, and so on. And then all of a sudden, as I've said before, and you've experienced this, within a very short period of time, we make the decision, let people work from home, and within a few days of that, our governor as well as probably most of your states, sent everybody home, and you didn't have a choice. So we went from 90% of our team, 95% of our team in one of our offices, to now 100% of our team, minus me on most days, being at home. That changes the way how we lead. The what of leadership, I believe, has to remain consistent. The how of leadership, though, in my experience in the last 3 or 4 weeks, has been that things change, right? So, I mean, we were just to give you some background, we were an organization that maybe had 4 or 5 people at a time working remote. Everybody else was in here. And in fact, most of us worked the same hours, right? Kind of the 8 to 5-ish. We allowed some flexibility in that, as most organizations do. But, within a very short span of structure, 8 to 5, to going home and working from your couch, or working from your garage, or working from the front of your house on a lawn chair. I don't care where you're working from at this point, but that is a big change. And here's the reality, as I've already said. The what of leadership, I don't think changes, but there's a significant change, at least in the how, in which I'm trying to lead and my leadership is trying to lead as well. But here's what I've realized. Before I get into kind of the things that we are doing or that I'm trying to do right now, I've come to realize there's some challenges that we have to be aware of as leaders in people working from home, people working remote, wherever they happen to be working. And we need to understand that dilemma, whether we're working at home, they're working at home, and how we interact with our teams, so that it changes, again, how we do leadership, not necessarily what. And some of these seem very simple, but I'm going to walk you through kind of the 4 that I see as big issues. I think there's more, but I've been hearing this from my team and even experienced this myself. Number 1 is this lack of face-to-face supervision. Now, this is an interesting one. When everybody's here in an office, it's really easy to see somebody when they come in, when they leave, when they're getting up to take have a cup of coffee, when they're taking a break to walk outside. There's a certain amount of face-to-face interaction that we have just by being here. And when you go completely remote, I didn't realize what impact, not just that it would have on my leaders and on myself, but on the team themselves. People joke, I don't need face-to-face interaction every day. I don't need my boss looking over my shoulder. And the feedback that I've gotten from some of our team members, which has been very honest, is I crave some of that. I'm potentially not able to get the same level of support from my leader because I'm sitting on my couch at home with my laptop and they're sitting in their couch at home with their laptop. So there's some inherent risks to not feeling connected, right? As leaders, when we first sent everybody home, the entire leadership team was like, hey, who do you think is going to work well from home? Who do you think's not? We kind of created a little bit of that self-doubt that some people potentially weren't going to be able to do it at home because they didn't have that face-to-face interaction. We didn't have that ability to see what they're doing. And then on the other hand, as I mentioned, some team members kind of looked at this, and now I've gotten some of the feedback of, I really want to be there in the office. I want to continue that mentoring I was getting. I really need somebody that I can go to, and we'll talk about this, kind of get that instant response, which we're not getting. We knew that there were going to be some challenges in this, but luckily, one of the things, and I've mentioned this on previous videos, we were able to, we have a behavioral profile on all of our team members, on myself and on every team member. And that's at least helping us to determine what level of support do they continue to need from us. But this number 1 issue, lack of face-to-face interaction, supervision, whatever you want to call it, is something as leaders we've got to understand. The second, which I just mentioned, is a lack to instant information. And this is really played out in 2 different ways. Number 1 would be what I call instant help. Whether you're a researcher on the team, a salesperson on the team, a recruiter, sourcer, consultant, whatever you are. It's real easy when you're looking for something to call over your cube or stick your head out of your office and say, hey, Gary, Devin, can you send me this? And you get it instantly. Now we've got to maybe send an instant message. We've got to maybe get on video. They've got to forward it back to us or attach it. And it seems like it should be instant, But we're so used to this instant help, this instant gratification, you can't stick your head over the cube because nobody's here. You can send them that IM, you can send them that video, but it feels different. This instant help just isn't there. This other piece is what I'm going to call it mutual knowledge or mutual understanding that ties into this instant information. You know, when you're here in an office or you're in your office, you can sense where other people are at. You can sense their feelings, good day, bad day. And you'll take that into consideration just naturally as humans when we do get an interaction with that person. Maybe we get a really short email from somebody and we don't like it because it's too short, but we understand they're probably having a bad day, and we give that person a little bit of grace. When you're working remote, we don't have that instant knowledge, this mutual knowledge of what's going on. So I'll give you myself as an example that I've had to be really, really cautious with. First of all, you would think after 49 years alive that I would learn to type. I've never learned to type the way you're supposed to type. So I'm kind of this 4-finger here, 3-finger here. So I keep my messages very, very short and to the point. And when people aren't having any interaction with me, that has now in the last 3-4 weeks has been received as, oh crap, he's having a bad day. He's pissed off at me, something, I don't know what's going on. And then they start to disengage. The team starts to disengage even more. So I've reverted to, especially for certain people, 100% video. My interaction with them is either we're going to get on Teams face to face or on our Facebook Workplace, or I'm going to record a video and send it, because just the way that I type, the way that I interact, we don't have this mutual knowledge of what's really going on, and I don't want to piss people off or disengage people any longer. So we've got to understand that that's not there when people are working from home. It's not there for you, and it's not there for them. And it seems so simple, but I've learned that it's not. I learned it the hard way by just continuing to do what I was doing, but in light of the environment that we're in, it was becoming ineffective. So lack of access to instant information is what I call it. The third one, and you've probably all felt this to a certain point, is social isolation. I go back and forth on this. My profile is one that, you know, I get energy from being around people. That's why I teach. That's why I do video like this. But I'm also okay sometimes just kind of taking it all in, being analytical about stuff. But many of our team members in particular that need for social interaction and social acceptance is extremely high. And of course, working remote, number one. Number two, we're all quarantined. We got to stay away from each other. And especially if we haven't been living with somebody else. There are people that are in their apartments all by themselves, and the only thing that they see is video or text or instant messages or something. So we need to understand this. Furthermore, and I've already referenced this, and I've experienced this with one or two of my team that I've had to go to, is those that have a really, really high need and are feeling the social isolation, they begin to get disengaged from the organization. It's not that we're doing anything wrong. It's just that it's easy for them, it's hard for them to be in social isolation, and then it's easy for them to start to disengage and disengage and disengage and disengage. The problem with that is sometimes you can't make up that disengagement. When things get better, those people, as I started off the conversation, even though they're great, we didn't do anything wrong, they may feel so disengaged that they don't have that loyalty to the organization any longer. And I think this is going to hurt companies all across the US and even may hurt us. So I'm trying to do everything we can to address those that are potentially having a high level of anxiety because of the social isolation. Then the fourth one, and it's almost a funny one, but I want to bring it up, is the distractions. As leaders, we need to understand the distractions that our teams are going through. You know, the couple of folks that we had working from home, when we either engaged with them to work from home or they asked us, one of our first questions was, do you have that private space? Do you have a space where nobody's going to bother you, that is yours, that you can work from home and focus and concentrate? And that's what we tend to do in a perfect world. Do you have that space? Let's get you the equipment. Let's make sure you have set hours and so on. And we didn't have that. in 24 hours, like you, like us, again, almost 24 hours, a little more than that, we went from mostly in-house to out. And a lot of people don't really have the place. A lot of people have their spouses, significant others now in the house, their apartment with them, kids, dogs, all of that stuff is going on. So as leaders, we need to understand that if you've got a mom or a dad who's got to tend to kids, change a diaper, that's going to throw that entire schedule completely off. Or if that child happens to take a nap at off times and needs to be interacted with now that they're home on certain times, there will be constant distractions. So our approach on how we lead somebody like that needs to change a bit. It needed to change for me, which has been, I'll be honest with you, somewhat of a challenge. It's easy to talk about it because it's almost kind of funny where we're having our group calls and you got dogs and cats crawling all over people in their pajamas, which I had a hard time with, in all honesty, in the first place. Now I think it's great. But there's some inherent problems. Those are the 4 inherent problems that I've experienced, that I know my team has experienced, and I'm sure you and your team are as well. So what do we do about it? As leaders, what do we need to understand? What do we need to do? How do we need to do it? That it may be a change in the how. Well, I'm going to give you 4 focuses that I'm focusing on right now, that I know this stuff, but in actuality, doing it while everybody's home has sometimes been a challenge for me. Number one is remember that leadership is about influence. It's not about rules and policies. Again, when everybody's in the office, it's easy to kind of exert our positional and our physical influence, right? People don't want to come in late because they know the boss is going to be there. People don't want to get up, and spend too much time, as I said earlier, around the coffee pot talking to their friend because the boss is there. The boss might see them. There's a certain amount of positional and physical influence we have when everybody is here. But here's the thing. You can't regulate performance. You might be able to for a short period of time when everybody's in the office, but you can't regulate performance when everybody's at home and you don't have a Nest Google Cam that's watching what they do and feeding it to you on your iPhone so you can see, are they working or are they not? As leaders, we got to stop focusing on we got to have a rule. You got to make sure at 8 o'clock you send me an email so I know you're there. Make sure at 5 o'clock you submit your electronic timesheet so I know you've worked the entire day. Those rules really don't work long term. And I've struggled with this because I'm very kind of process driven in certain areas. This has been a challenge. So leadership is all about influence. And here's the thing. And this is probably the toughest for really any leader. To increase your influence, you have to increase your trust, or your trust with that other person. Now, let me give you an example of where this is a challenge. When this whole idea of people working from home came about many years ago, my attitude, my opinion on all this was, when you earn the right, we'll consider it. Now think about that for a second. When you earn the right, what is that telling the person that works for you? In essence, I don't trust you to work from home, so I don't have complete faith in your ability to do the work. So what's going to happen with that individual? If they know as a leader, their leader does not trust them implicitly, they will rise to the level of that trust or lack thereof and not any further. So as lead, it's kind of like your kids, right? Yeah, your kids do some stupid things as they're growing up and they lose a little bit of trust. But I think most of us trust our kids first, which is why our kids excel. Sure, they may get knocked down in a ring and they have to regain some trust because they did something really stupid, but they start off with full trust. When we tell our team, or we put so many rules around it, in essence, we're telling our teams, I don't trust you. They're going to feel that and will live up to that level of trust, which is way below where it should be. So the how is giving trust and letting them lose the trust, not saying you need to earn my trust and I'll release the rules. Now I'm going to get a lot of pushback on this. I've had a lot of discussions in the last 2 weeks with some of my clients on this particular thing. It has worked. I have not used it. I got to be honest with you. I have been one that is, you got to earn my trust before I give it to you, as I said earlier. But I've had to really adjust my thinking on this and say, you got this. You figure it out. And I'm okay with it. Now, I'm going to watch it to make sure that my trust is not being taken advantage of. But the mindset has got to be, and it's especially important when people are remote. And I talked about this in video webinar number 1. The 3 things that I do to keep building trust with my team so that my level of trust, their level of trust with me is higher, was how I made decisions, right? I planned for it, I shared it, and then I listened to them. Those were the things that I did with them, right? So that it kept building that trust, so I had greater influence, or the influence of the leadership team was greater. So that's focus number 1, is this whole idea of leadership is about influence and not about rules. Focus number 2, I'm going to take one step further. Leadership is not about rules, as we've already talked about. It's about expectations. This is another one that people are struggling with, and I don't struggle with this one as much, but much of my team is struggling with this, right? Again, before we went off on remote, we were in kind of an 8 to 5 shop, right? Because we're in the service delivery business. We bill that by the hour. A lot of our clients in this geographic East Coast, Eastern time zone, Central time zone, some in the Mountain time zone. We do have some Pacific, but it was very kind of structured, right? It was around, here's the hours we work, here's the hours I want you to be here in the office, and we've relaxed it a bit over the years. But now we've got to look at, okay, you've got distractions, as we've talked about. You have the issues of social isolation. You got to get outside and take a walk when the weather's nice to clear your head because we're confined to our homes and so on. And we really need to take a step back. And it's not about, again, the rules of you've got to work from 8 to 5, you've got to be able to do this. Given everything going on and those distractions, what if it's easier for somebody to work 6 to 10, take a break, deal with their kids, work again from 12 to 2, take a break, work with their kids, and maybe work, the kids go to bed at 7 and they can still be productive from 7 to 9 at night or something along those lines. That flexibility is not something that we used to do. We did it with our sales team, but beyond that we didn't. And I know a lot of organizations are not doing that either. So we've got to make sure that we flip it from here's the rules of operation to here's the expectation. The expectation is you deliver on this. Here's why this is such a big deal. Most organizations, including ours for some of our positions up until recently, we could not be clear about what our expectations were. Sure, I could say to a salesperson, here's your quota. That's the easiest one to do. But in any of our delivery positions, we have to really think about it, and I'm sure you have to think about it. What are the expectations we need so that we're clear? Some of our team needs very clear guardrails of what's expected every day. Some of our team, does yours, just needs to know at the end of the week they need to have accomplished these things. But it's all about expectations, not the rules there. The key here is it's all about the clarity of expectations. And I had, again, having this conversation with some folks that I know and saying, do you know what's expected of you while you're working from home? And their comment was more of the same. What's the deliverable at the end of the week, the end of the month? I really don't have one. It's what we were doing. This person, unfortunately, is working about 3.5 hours a day, even though they're supposed to be working 8 hours a day and getting paid their full salary. So, and this is somebody that I would respect as generally somebody who's pretty conscious about stuff like this. But given the circumstances, with no expectations as leaders, we can't expect the same level of delivery or the same level of productivity if we're not very clear about the expectations that are set. That's focus number 2. Focus number 3 for me has been remembering that each of my people, each of your people, each of our leaders' people, each of my leaders are all very different. So here's what happens. Our natural tendency is to want to interact with others the way we want to be interacted with. right? I want somebody to get right to the point with me. I want somebody to cut through the BS. That's just kind of how I am wired. My natural drives are, let's get stuff done really quick. And oh, by the way, I want to kind of drive the way that it's getting done to a certain extent. But my team and your team are very different. Again, some very high with that need that social acceptance, that social interaction. Some, they're happy in front of a computer. Some, they need opportunities to really hold on and own something and show that result. Others, that's not a big deal to them. Some, they need a very structured by the day. Here's my expectations at the end of the day, and they even want some guardrails. Others, just tell me, we're going from point A to point Z, I'll figure out how to get there. That comes down to the way we communicate with them, how we communicate with them, the way we do interact with them, don't interact with them, the way that we either use video versus text. All of those things come into play. Look, everybody might be equal, but we're not the same. So as leaders, we need to make sure we truly understand each of the people that report directly to us as an individual and what they need. And we've been able to do that. We've got to remember that each person is different. Some of our team really need to understand the why versus the what, meaning this. We're waiting for our approval for the Payroll Protection Act and those funds to come in here. And some people are just like, okay, great, let me know when it hits. Others are like, why are we waiting? What's taking so long? Well, didn't the bank already approve it? Doesn't the SBA? Different communication, different interaction, different information for different people. And what I have found is in situations like this, we have a tendency to go into self mode, at least I did, and we communicate with everybody else the way we want to be communicated to. It doesn't work. I've proven it doesn't work. That's focus 3. And then focus 4, and I referenced this in a previous live webinar, is keep some things the same. I'll give you an example. When this whole thing happened and our governor shut us down and said, go work from home, our focus was, oh crap, right? As I'm sure it was for a lot of you as leaders and so on. And it really came down to, okay, our number one thing has got to be, let's go get some more business so we don't have to lay anybody off. We knew projects were going to be put on hold, so let's just put everything else off. We stopped leadership development. We stopped a number of the other things that we were doing. But here's what's happening. Your people are looking at you to see how you respond in times of crisis. And if your response in crisis is let's change everything, cancel everything, put everything off, they're going to follow that and be freaked out in essence because it shows where your priorities, it shows where your purpose is, as I mentioned in webinar 1. So although we put the kibosh on a few things for 2 weeks, we ultimately brought all of those things back because in times of crisis, especially when everybody's at home, there has to be some consistency for everyone. Life doesn't stop. The things we were doing, it's not the what we were doing, but in how we're delivering them, how we're doing the training now, how we're going to interact with them has changed. But not everything has changed. We want to keep some things consistent. And that has been a focus that I've had to get my arms around because I canceled a bunch of stuff in the first couple of weeks. I need to focus on how we're going to do this and how we're going to pay our bills and how we're going to pay your payroll. Just don't bother me. And what does that do when we're sharing that with our teams? You can share the facts, but the way we respond to those facts has a negative potentially impact on our team. So let me kind of sum this up for you, right? Here's what we need to remember. There's at least 4, I think there's more common challenges to our teams working remote, right? Lack of that face-to-face leadership, lack of access to instant information, right? And that mutual knowledge of each other, the social isolation, and the distractions that are going to be common. For us as leaders, whether you're leading 1, whether you're leading 1,000, I really don't care. This has been my experience. We have to focus our leadership on what it's always been, and it's through influence, and that influence is created through the trust you have with your teams. You have to give the trust. It's not up to your teams to earn it because they'll feel that you're not giving them full trust. Number 2, and it sounds so simple, but it showed me that we didn't do it, and I'm sure other organizations aren't doing it because I'm having the conversations, the clarity of expectations when working from home is so much more important than when everybody's sitting in an office and you can correct them on the dime. That's number 2. Number 3, we've got to understand what drives each individual person. We've got to connect through their heart and their mind, and you can only know that by the drives. You know, I was taught long ago, separate the personal from the professional. I think that's crap. I think that's absolute crap. I followed that for 40 years of my life, right? As a leader, probably 19 years of my life. You have to connect with your team's heart. Doesn't mean you get too personal with them, because there's an appropriateness that you don't, or there's a line you don't want to cross, right? But you got to connect with their mind and their heart. You can't just do one, especially if you want to influence them in times of crisis. And number 4, we've got to keep some things the same. Now, the point here was just to lay out some basics, some things that I'm going through. One of the other things that I'm going to make available to everybody that's watching, and this is going to be for free, I'm taking my executive team through a leadership program literally called Leading Through Crisis. And it's information that was given to me by actually another organization that I'm able to offer at no cost. It's going to be 8 weeks, really in-depth. How do we make opportunity out of crisis? How do we deal with the day-to-day stuff that's going on? But it's limited to 12 people per session. So if you're interested, go to www.steveloez.com/leading through crisis. Again, www.steveloez.com/leading through crisis. It's going to be an 8-week mastermind, which is, mastermind's different than a webinar. It's going to be live. It's going to be through Zoom probably. But it's the 12 people, 11 plus myself, getting really in-depth on how we're going to do this in each of our organizations. What are we doing? The challenges that we're having. And this is an environment where we share with each other and we help each other. So it's not a webinar. It's not a one-way conversation. If you or you know of a leader that would need that, send them to that, apply there, I'll reach out, we'll have a conversation. If you want to share this with a leader, if you want to share this with somebody else, feel free to do that. The recorded version of this will probably be up by tomorrow, midday or so. Please share it if it's helpful to somebody else. Next week, the 4th in our series, we'll be looking at where's the opportunity in crisis. And it sucks to think about it in one way, right? Because here we are figuring out crap. We've got 7 million people unemployed now. The numbers are going to keep getting bigger as companies are shut. We've got all this other stuff to worry about. Now you want to talk about opportunities in crisis? Yeah, because it forces us to look at opportunities. I wouldn't have done that in the past, but the way that I've developed over the years, the way I'm looking now at things is even in the midst of the crap that we have going on right now, there's a silver lining. And I'm not a perpetual optimist, anybody who knows me, but I believe that situations like this create opportunities to better ourselves, better our organizations, better whatever we deliver to our clients. I'm at least going to share from my perspective and what we're doing and how we're doing that. I hope this was helpful to some of you. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'm 20 minutes short, which I wanted to make sure we kept it to 30 or 40 minutes. But take care. Anything you can do to support our first responders, our health professionals, would be awesome. And we'll see you guys again very soon.